Today I'm going to do a little tutorial on attaching your binding and focusing on how to attach the corner and sew that on so it's nice and even and looks really clean when you're done. So first thing I'm going to do, I already have my binding made. In this case I have a double fold binding made. So when I open it all up, and at the end I'm going to fold the corner down just like this, so I have a little triangle at the end. I'm going to press that down so I get a nice little crease there. I like to use my little ruler, roll that down, get a nice crease there. Unfold it, flip it over so I have my little crease here. What I like to do, my little trick, is I like to trim down this little excess piece of fabric. It's really not needed. It's just going to be tucked away in your binding anyway. And really it's just adding to the bulkiness of your binding, which the best thing to do when adding your binding is have the least amount of bulkiness in there. It's going to add a really nice clean finish when you're done. So what I do is I see my line here. I cut about 1/4 of an inch or so over and trim off this little bit. This little bit surprisingly will add a decent amount of bulkiness to it, so it's not needed. We're just gonna get rid of that. So when I flip it back over, as you can see, I have my crease there, but I just have a little bit of overlapping there to give myself a completed edge here and not have anything raw sticking out. So I'm gonna bring my project over. It's just a little coaster that I'm working on, little quilt as you go. So I'm going to take my binding. I'm going to start by aligning it on the bottom wherever you want to start, right here. My favorite tool is using the clover clips. They're my absolute favorite. So I'm just going to clip it on. Like so. I'm going to bring it over to my needle. I'm going to start sewing my binding on. In this case, I have the double fold binding, so I'm going to sew along this very first crease. I'm going to use a small stitch length and always do my back stitches in the beginning of where I'm sewing. So I did my first stitch here. When I get to the edge of my project, you want to leave 1/4 of an inch gap in between the edge of your project and your stitch. So now that you're at your corner, what you're going to do is you're going to take your binding and you're going to fold it out and away from your project like so. What I like to do is bring it towards a straight edge, align my project, and then align my binding on that straight edge as well. You want this part to be nice and even here. So I'm going to fold that out. I'm going to finger press here. Get a nice little crease. I'm going to hold this part down. Then I'm going to take my binding again and I'm going to flip it towards my project across like so. And I'm going to align this edge along this side of my fabric, keeping your little folded edge along here and then your raw edge along this edge of your fabric like so. I'm going to finger press it just a little bit to keep it down. Grab my clips again, clip that on so it doesn't go anywhere. So now, as you can see, I have this flap where this edge, the folded edge, again, is aligned with this side of the fabric and then the raw edge here. I'm going to bring it back over to my machine and I'm going to stitch down this side. Again though, we don't want to get too close to the edge with our stitch. We're going to leave a 1/4 of an inch, again, between the raw edge and where we start our stitches. Always back stitching at the front and again at the end. So I'm just going to go along this edge of my project. When I get close to the edge, I am going to leave a 1/4 of an inch until I get to the raw edge of my project. For the binding, don't go to the very edge. You always want to leave that little gap. That's going to help make your corners really nice. So I'm just going to show you here. When you're done, of course I'm not quite done with this one yet, but just to show you, when you go to flip your binding over, this is going to leave you with a really nice mitered corner, which looks just so gorgeous when you're done. I'm just going to flip this over here just to show you, hold it on the back. See how that leaves you with a really nice, even corner. So you'll get the hang of this. It can be a little finicky in the beginning. The most important thing is when you're sewing the corners on, make sure you leave that 1/4 inch always on every side. I like to sometimes just take a little flat edge, align it with the edge of my fabric, and then either put a mark there or just take a little mental note where on the fabric pattern I need to stop. You want to get as accurate as you can on those 1/4 inches. That's going to give you a really great binding finish. So I wanted to show you quick how when I get to the edge, when I go the whole way around my project and I get back to the beginning, how I finish off my binding. So this, there's a couple different ways you could do this. The way I like to do it is when I have my excess here, my tail, I'm just gonna put it along over top where I started, and I'm gonna just cut. As you can see, here is the edge, here's my new piece. I'm just going to cut this piece just a little bit over where I started at the same angle, just diagonally like this. So I'm just going to take my little scissors and I'm just going to cut it like that. So now I have my starting point, here's my end, and that's just going to kind of sit right over and overlap it just a little bit. And I'll take it over to my machine and I'll finish up this very last bit of stitching, making sure that I leave my little 1/4 of an inch over here at the end for my corner so that sits nice. And just sewing down, sewing that end piece back to the start, starting back where we are at the beginning. And then when we turn our binding over, flip that over, that'll add a nice finished bit to the end of your binding when you flip that over. Okay, so now that my binding is all stitched onto the front, I'm going to show you how you would machine sew the back. So first I am just going to fold from the front my binding towards the back. If you're using the double fold binding, then you would of course fold this first crease in, fold it over towards the back. Make sure your corners are pressed out nice. Just press them from the back to the front to get that nice little corner tucked away in there. So that'll be nice and clean and really professional looking when you're done. So towards the back, I'm just going to pull my binding down. The stitch line is going to show on the back where you sewed your binding onto the front. You want to use that as a guide. So your binding on the back, you want that to cover and go just a little bit over that stitch. That way, when you stitch it, the stitch on the back is going to show just along the edge of the binding, but on the front, we want it to show just next to the binding. We don't want any stitches on our binding. We kind of want them to be more or less hidden from view. So we're going to pull our binding down just over that stitch, and I love to use these clover clips for everything. They're really good to keep in place. They're really easy to just clip on and off. So I'm going to just clip around every side here, just a few clips to keep everything in place where I want it to be. I like to take a little bit of extra time in the corners. I like to make sure that they are really nice and neat. They're already really great on the front, so I want to keep that going on the back. So I take a little bit of extra time when I'm folding these over and clipping them in place. So I'm going to start stitching now that I have everything pinned down nicely. As you go along, just keep grabbing it at the binding and just pulling it tight. That way you're going to get a nice even stitch on the front that's not showing any stitches on the binding. Always do your back stitch at the beginning of your stitch and of course at the end again, just to keep it nice and secure. Again, as I go, I'm just kind of pulling my binding nice and tight, so that way I have a nice, even, tight binding that looks very nice when we're done. As you get to the corner, just keep stitching straight until you grab just a little bite of the binding on that next side, and then you can keep going along. What I like to do is just lift my presser foot up, flip my project over, so that way I can see how I'm doing with my stitches. So when I look towards the front, I shouldn't see any stitches along the binding. I should just see them at the very edge of the project there. As you can see, right here, I went just 2 stitches over the binding. That's gonna happen. You'll get the hang of it. I'm not going to worry too much about this project in particular. It's just for me, something that maybe I was entering into a fair or something like that, or giving as a gift. I would probably take these stitches out and redo them. But I'm just going to enjoy this little project that I'm making, so I'm just going to keep moving along, keep pulling my binding tight, and enjoy the process. So we're all done. On the back of your project, you should see your stitch just inside of your binding. very close to the edge, just a big square here in this case. On the front, when you look for your stitch, you really shouldn't see much of it. It's gonna lay right inside, so you can barely see it there, just hugging the fold of your binding. If you went a little bit over, as I did on this side, you can see the stitch just kind of is on the edge there, kind of wonky on this side. I got a little crazy there, but you'll get the hang of it. If you're okay with the little bit of stitching on the front side, then great, but if not, really easy to just pick it out and redo it. Everything needs practice, of course, but I'm really happy with my little project, my little coaster, and I hope that I was able to teach you a little something here today, make it a little easier for you to make something super fun. Leave me a comment, send me a message. I'd love to know if this was helpful for you, if I should do some more videos, or if you have any tips on binding, attaching it, folding, whatever. I'd love to hear it so I can share that also with everybody.